Okay, we're live. So here we are, Florida Blood Bowl AMA number 3. As
Yay!
usual, yay! Live without a net, as we like to say. So this is James from the Vieira, Melbourne area, and with me, as always, is Ryan over in Tampa.
Hello, everybody.
And as you may or may not have seen, tonight we have a very special guest. We have Jim Lanier with us, Old Man Monkey.
Hey there, guys. It's good to be on your show.
Cool. Yeah, we're just I was thinking about it on the drive over here, and I've tried to do podcasts before because they're just so cool, and the guys who do them, they do such a great, phenomenal job. And it's like I want to do that, and every time I tried, I just could not do it, and I was probably doing it for all the wrong reasons. And there's nothing wrong with doing it for the people out there, but for me, nothing was clicking. And then when Ryan and I started doing this, it was almost just kind of like just for the people in Florida, and we were kind of doing it for them, at least from my perspective, and it wasn't about me at all. And I don't know, it just seemed to flow a lot for me. It flowed a lot better and just kind of came out naturally, organically, as they say.
Right.
And YouTube format's a little unique too, which I like that. The live aspect of it, which I think is pretty good. And I like the fact that I've talked to people and they're like, yeah, I went back and listened to it later. It's out there for later, but people can chime in midstream if they want to.
Yeah, which is something. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like so much of this, being the old man of the group, I've watched this whole technology, even from the recording software that I have in the studio behind me. I've watched so much of this change that it's just remarkable to me that we could just almost casually get on a group like this together and talk about the things we love to talk about. And I assure you that even as recently as 10 years ago, that was not the case.
Yeah, a lot of stuff's really changed technology-wise. I was thinking about that, like in regards, and this is something we'll talk about later with the Three Kingdoms Challenge, is that back when you were doing that tournament, which was, what year about was that? Was that in the early 2000s?
Yeah, I had been the treasurer for the NAF, I think 2 years, so that put it probably about 05, 06. And had gone over for two years in a row to the grand tournament, and the NAF was starting to sort of click, and at that time they had the specialist games division, and Jake Thornton, who's now a really good friend of mine, and Andy Hall, who had long time been Jervis's kind of right hand when it came to all the things that are going on over there. They both were hot to come to America, and I just lucked out. I mean, I just sort of had said, hey, it's Florida. You got the great weather. It was relatively early spring, so it was still really cold over in England. And so we got them for kind of like cheap flights and a even cheaper hotel set up. And we had a great tournament. There was a lot of people from around the country, people from as far away as the Pacific Northwest, and Ken Washington came down from DC, Ken, and just had just a super group. And that's when I guess it was now, as I look back on it, it had to be sort of the last glory days of Sci-Fi City in Orlando, and they had just a big, nice space, and they were really helpful to us. And there was a courtyard down the street, and I had 1 million courtyard Marriott points, I think. So I brought a group over from Tampa, and Phil Bowen was among that group. Phil was the one who carved the original mummy figure in the original Undead set, and still lives here. He's a big guild baller now, but I brought him up to the team tournament up in Virginia a few months ago.
The America Cup.
Yeah, the America Cup, and it was sort of like, how do I play this game again? Oh yeah, that's right.
It's like riding a bike.
Oh yeah, it was great fun, and a lot of people still admire that sculpt. I mean, at that time, Phil was considered to be one of the real sculpting gurus and green stuff geniuses around. So um, it's been an interesting I could say 15 years now. It's like wow, like, and I kind of got not dragged into it kicking and screaming, but I got dragged into it because I was managing the University of South Florida bookstore at the time, and there were two guys that worked down in the receiving department, and they would bring out a Blood Bowl board during their lunch breaks and start playing this game. And I walked down there one day and go, what in the world is that? And they tried to explain it to me, and I said, that just looks crazy. That just looks, but they obviously, I mean, the more I watched it with just rolling dice and killing people and elves doing impossible things, the more it just struck my imagination, and it was all downhill from there.
The ironic part is, like, especially with me, and I'm you know, I every now and then I'll ask other people, I'm not even a football fan. Like, it's okay, you know, the NFL and, you know, whatever else, it's all right, but I'm not like a diehard football fan. I know a lot of people are, but like, there's just something about, you know, Blood Bowl that takes all the elements of all the things that I like. Like, I like football, but I don't, you know, I'm not fanatical about it. I love tabletop games. I love miniature. I love dice. I love it, and it just melds it all into one perfect game. I say the words perfect. Someone out there's probably cringing, but you know, I think it's a perfect game. I enjoy
Well,
it.
it certainly came across at the perfect time as GW was sort of desperate for re-energizing certain parts of their whole list of brands, and the Blood Bowl community, and it existed before me and even John Lewis, but there were people like Tom Anders, Gallic, Starscraper, um, who were just, and Phil Bowen was one. There were probably a couple hundred across the world. Christopher, who did the original BB email leagues and also designed the original NAF website. There were just a handful. I say a handful, several hundred, a couple hundred anyway, who were just not going to let this game die. And they created, using it, like you said, we were talking earlier about the technologies. I mean, Krister created this elegant, and when you really go back and play by email Blood Bowl, it is an elegant solution and has only gotten better. He has stayed with it for well over 15 years now, and there were people who were discussing the rules and what are we going to do. And in 2002, I want to say, 2002, there suddenly was the discussion among the GW people, and Jervis kind of was leading the parade about what are we going to do with this? Are we going to throw it away? Are we going to sell it? Or what are we going to do? And got in touch with some of those people. And John Lewis, the first NAP president, was pretty instrumental. John is one of those wonderfully OCD, brilliant, genius level programmers and that stuff. At the time, I remember that he was working on a top secret. He wouldn't tell anybody about what it was. He was actually working on one of the 2 or 3 biggest gambling websites that now dominate the web. He was just, that kind of guy. But he also, we had seen, or those who were really into the move from cards into electronics and that stuff, saw what Wizard of the Coast did with their tournament rule sets and how that just energized their whole tournament scene among Magic players. So they got them, they developed the mathematical, the algebra for it, and then wrote the code for it. And it was amazing. To me, it was amazing because I just still wasn't aware of just how many people were ready to play Bubble, I guess. But the NAF, when it was announced at the first Resurrection, which was, the first Blood Bowl, I think, grand tournament in quite some time. There was a large group over in Holland as well. The Utrecht and Amsterdam people had kept their leagues kind of going secretly at some of the coffee houses or whatever there, and they had tournaments and games going on. So,
are you saying that there were Blood Bowl speakeasies?
I am saying there are coffee houses in Amsterdam particularly that are familiar with the game of Blood Bowl. If at some point in time, and I can talk forever about this, because sooner or later there's going to be a small pamphlet or history written. James Wood, Jimmy. I keep wondering what to say, James or Jimmy, now that he's a dad again, but Woody, as I should say, who was the second NAF president, has been after particularly me and Gallic and on this side of the world too, and John, and if we can rest him out in New York City, to write down some of the history and that stuff and put it together, and because there's a lot of great stories. There's a lot of things that I think people who play Blood Bowl and really enjoy it now almost need to know about. Like, that rule wasn't in there like 12 years ago. Like, I'm still getting used to wrestle. Like,
yeah. That was kind of, I had a gap in my Blood Bowlism. I played when I was a freshman in high school through maybe like, so 94, 95, because I remember we played school. And then I played probably up until 2000, 2001, like around with friends and stuff like that. And then I came back into it just before the 2016 edition came out. I actually bought a box set on Blood Bowl. I love it as every game. And then all of a sudden 2016 was coming out and I was like, great, this is a perfect time to jump in. But yes, coming back and like all the rules changes, I'm like, what the hell is Fend? Like, what is this? And just weird things like, oh man, my secret weapons automatically get out. I don't have to roll 6 and try to get above the number. Like, so occasionally I'll get a rule completely wrong because I'm thinking of the older edition, not the.
Well, yeah, I get it. We've been preparing ever since we decided to have our 4th World Cup. The guys from Germany, I guess, still want me to hang around, and so I'm the head referee and kind of organizing that. So I have to really make sure that I'm on to all this rules. We got our own little secret Facebook group with all the referees that'll be there, and it's a bunch of I want to say not a bunch, but probably better than half of fairly old guard like me who need to be minded in that stuff. But yeah, it's great fun. I look at it, and the way I describe it is like it's basically mayhem, football mayhem. Basically, the rules of kind of turn-based football, but you're using the characters of the Lord of the Rings, and that's another thing. I mean, it came together again around the time at the height of all of the Lord of the Rings chaos. So people, even the casual person, finally knew what a dwarf looked like, or an orc looked like, or any of those kinds of things. And so, the ones who would capture the imagination, particularly the Americans. I mean, the Americans just thought that was like the coolest. And then the cross-pollination between the growth of the NFL and interest in professional football on the European side, particularly. I mean, it's a perfect. Malcolm Gladwell will be really happy with describing this as a perfect storm of events, and I'm glad for it. It certainly has enriched my life in ways that I wouldn't have imagined. I go to Europe now 2 or 3 times a year. I play with a very fun group of players who now, for all of that 15 years, I have played the game with. And I have sometimes been so disinterested in the actual board game that I have flipped a coin for winner, loser, touchdown, and casualties. But there have been sometimes I have been so into it that I'd be beside a canal in Amsterdam with a German friend of mine, and we would pull out our pocket change and say, okay, this 2p piece, he is a goblin, and I've got 5 of them. And so we would play an impromptu Blood Bowl game right there on a table next to a canal in Amsterdam. So for me, it's almost romantic in that sense, because I have one foot in the romantic. I'm old enough to be in the old romantic camp, and that my other leg is decidedly cynical and postmodern. So it's interesting to me to to see all of that, and it's fun to watch. I went this past November to Florence for about a month and saw just the passion of what a true league. It's kind of where I had hoped we were heading in Florida, but where the distances in America, and we can talk more about that, is like the real prohibition part of prohibitive things that make Blood Bowl in America a little bit more of a challenge. But I saw a passionate league in Florence, Italy, and there were literally, I think, 4 or 5 teams, red, white, blue, green, and black. And they literally had divided the league into 5 separate teams of about 14 players a team, and then had a 1 through 14 ranking. So every week they would play among themselves and figure out who was the number 1, and that would be, they couldn't play the same person obviously the week in a row. So they went through this massive league schedule, and I was there on championship night, and it was remarkable. It was just chaotic. It was a small World Cup all by itself. I mean, their league is 70 plus players. So
wow.
it's just and I've experienced it, though I haven't been there on some of those. I have seen it. I have seen the black shirts in London on their league night with more than 40 players. I've seen just French the London. There's 2 big London 2 big Paris groups in the French leagues that have just tear at each other all the time, and they just I mean, like I mentioned before, the Utrecht versus Amsterdam leagues are classical. They are all in swearing at each other. They're all just playing passionate games of Blood Bowl. And then afterwards, and this is the other part. There's just so many things. Afterwards, we all break bread and have a drink and tell our stories and have a ball, admire each other's handiwork on their painting and that stuff. There's just so much about this game. Like I tell people, it's American football played with miniatures, turn-based, using the races of the Lord of the Rings, and you can play it in 2 hours and have a beer afterwards.
That's definitely a great way to describe it.
I think you brought up an interesting point about distances, because I listen to a lot of the podcasts that are out there, and a lot of times some of the major podcasts that are out there are located in Great Britain, and they'll talk about it like, oh, we've got a really long one this weekend. We got a tournament, and guys, we got to drive like 2 hours. And I'm like, wow, that's not bad at all. Like, but they're like, oh no, like that's across the country. And I guess it is for them, but yeah, I guess Great Britain isn't too much bigger than Florida, I guess, or the main island.
Yeah.
Britain, like, isn't too much bigger than Florida. So for the amount of concentrated Blood Bowl that they have over there, I think, yeah, traveling to tournament scenes and things like that, it's different here than it is there with that. So I think there are challenges in America, and I've heard Australia has a lot of the same challenges as what I've heard too.
Yeah. It's exact. I mean, it's just simply the physical distances. After every World Cup, from first, second, third, and I'm sure we'll get the pressures or the impetus to try and host something here. And I love the fact that the center, west, east is all slowly kind of cross-pollinating. There are some real intrepid travelers now that are coming, particularly to the Midwest. I mean, it's still, meeting in the center seems to be the way to go. And but I've always cautioned. I said, you got, number one, if it's ever in the United States, it's probably going to be a tournament of 400 or 500, maybe. I mean, you maybe get an American turnout of 150 to maybe 200. I mean, that can make that trip and plan the time and do that stuff. And then you maybe get 150 to 200 more that will come to the United States. Orlando, Las Vegas, all the major cheap hotel tourist centers are players in that. But it's still, I've urged people to not put the cart before the horse and not get too carried away. I really got onto them at Italy because I thought that they had kept the price unfortunately too low. And I say unfortunately just because, it's counterintuitive. Like, oh look, we can put on this massive tournament and only charge, I think it was some insane number like 35 euros or 45 euros. It was like half of what it was everywhere else. And I said, you needed to keep the price because in the United States, the tournament would probably be $120 to $25 as the tournament fee. Just that would cover some of the expenses. Besides, you're not going to reimburse travel, obviously, or hotel or any of those kinds of things. But even just to offer meals and some of the things that are now going on at the World Cup, it's logistically, people better know what they're doing because the NAF could take one hit of a failed World Cup, but it couldn't probably take two or three in a row. We've done real well. I mean, part of my success, if there was any at being the treasurer, was to say no. Like, I'm the guy that's going to say no to everything. You are not going to travel from the United States to Nottingham for the Blood Bowl Grand Tournament. No, not going to pay for that. Not going to happen. We're not going to come up with gold and ruby and emerald. I mean, there was these pins that somebody wanted to do one time. Like, oh yeah, they get to do like 5 tournaments, they get a gold pin. No, we're not going to do that. We're just not going to spend that kind of money. And so now there's funds in the bank, and as there should be, they've been watched over very carefully by Paul Gegg and now the board and committee. And I was about to say the success I had is that we've made the running of the NAF and the offices and the structure and all that kind of stuff very bureaucratic. I mean, and I'm happy with that. Nothing pleases me more because the beginnings are the delicate times. The beginnings are when you make choices that have the long-term impacts and that stuff. And
it's hard to change once you get going.
Yeah, it's you're going to go down. I mean, if we had our own rules committee and decided to fight GW in the beginning, I'm not sure if it kept. There are passionate groups of players in variety of countries, and I love my friends in Spain all the time, but they're always in some state of insurrection, it seems like.
That is very true. I've seen their treatises on different things. They do love to rebel.
And the thing about it is that there's a certain part of this game and the tournament play of it and stuff that there's a great number of programmers and just bright computer people and that stuff. So they all think, well, we could do an alternative alt NAF and run our own tournament scene and that kind of stuff. And yes, you probably could. I think we've demonstrated to both GW and all the powers that are making the decisions these days that we are not a bunch of wild-eyed, hair on fire kind of guys. That we understand. Like I said, we've got a fairly good set of bureaucrats in there. Some people, personalities are always going to be, the tricky part. But the institution now, at least of the tournament scene, is fairly well established, and I think people appreciate it and are glad to have it. And when you go to a well-run Blood Bowl tournament that just has all the stuff, it's a pretty impressive day or 2 days. I know we're here to talk a little bit about the Three Kingdoms, and I guess anybody who listens to this later on is going to hear all of us argue among ourselves, and that's okay because I'm set on trying to get back to a 2 day because I want what I've always wanted with the American player is to experience as much of what goes on in and around the European tournaments as possible. And a lot of that happens in the meet and greets. It happens in the post tournament. It happens in the between games and lunch times and that stuff. I mean, those are we have this odd persona, stereotype is the word I guess I'm looking for, of what a gamer is, and I know I don't fit it. I don't think I do anyway. I maybe I'm a nerd behind the doors, but I don't even think that I don't think that a nerd is the right thing to do it. It's just board games bring out the best parts of us and the worst parts of us without killing somebody or somebody getting paid $1 million. I mean, it allows us to be passionate. It's the same thing almost that sports, for those people who are more physical minded, then they turn to the sport that gets their attention, and gamers play the games that bring their attention. If you're prone to chess, you play chess. If you're prone to Go, you play Go. If you're prone to Blood Bowl, you play Blood Bowl.
Well, I think you've touched on it a couple of times, where Blood Bowl in particular, there's a huge social aspect of the game. You get involved on the message boards, which the Talk Fantasy Football message board has been going on for a long time. And I get on there every now and then, but then you have, the Facebook community pages, and you have all the groups, and you have, like you said, the meet and greets at the tournaments, and the outings, and there really is a huge side of that with Blood Bowl, and I really like it, and I think that's another thing that draws me personally to it. And I can't even begin to tell you how many friendships. I mean, Ryan's a prime example. I mean, I moved down to Florida, and Ryan and I struck up conversation about Blood Bowl, and here we are.
Next thing we know, we're driving over to what, Alabama?
Yeah, driving to Alabama.
Like I met you once. We're gonna go on a trip.
Right. The rest, as they say, is history.
Mark Perry out in Vegas, he and I have gotten to be really good friends over the past almost 3 years, and it started with Blood Bowl. And I can't begin to tell you how many relationships I've developed and maintained, all based on this game. And and we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail, but it's part of the reason why I want to see that tournament come back to Florida, because as of right now, Florida hasn't had a 2-day Blood Bowl tournament. We have a Blood Bowl weekend coming up where there's going to be 3 separate events, but it's not a 2-day Blood Bowl tournament. We may not see the same group of coaches throughout each day. So we're right there, looking to do our first big 2-day tournament. And I think the Three Kingdoms Challenge is, for me, it's what I want. I've had so many people, before I got in touch with you and we started talking about it, like Ramsey is a prime example, or Patrick Wynn. I've heard stories about this tournament for since I moved down to Florida. And I got down to Florida right when what was it, Sci-Fi City? What was the name of the big place?
Yeah, Sci-Fi City.
Yeah, I got down here right when they were closing. So when I was in Pennsylvania and I was moving down here, I'm like, this is how OCD I was. Like, I'm calling places in Florida saying, "Do you guys have a Blood Bowl league? No? Could I come in and start one?" And I'm calling around to all these game stores, because we had a very successful league back in Pennsylvania. We had 30 plus coaches, a developmental league, 2 leagues, and
was that Harrisonburg, Jim, or was that
no, north of Harrisburg, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, the Harrisburg, those guys have been playing for a while, longer than we started our leagues up in Wilkes-Barre. Yeah. But then we started getting those guys. They were coming up north. We had the guy Nate Beam and his crew coming up. Right. We had Mark Zuck coming down from New York. So we were in like a very good area to get a lot of people in. And, all that stuff built up over the course of 2 years, give or take. And when I was moving to Florida, there was a part of me, I'm like, man, I do not want to let that go. What if I get down there and no one wants to play Blood Bowl? Because this is before the box set got re-released, and it wasn't even, no one knew it was coming out yet. So I'm like worrying about this stuff. So I'm calling game stores, and I called Sci-Fi City, and they're like, oh yeah, Blood Bowl was a thing, but we're closing our doors. And I'm like, so I'm calling other game stores, and they're like, yeah, nope, no Blood Bowl here.
Well, Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to hold this thought and carry this condition. I've got some soup on the stove, and I want to go at least turn the stove off. So I will be right back.
You take care of your soup. Ryan and I will keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, you guys keep it rolling, and I promise I'll be right back.
Okay, we'll be here. Never neglect soup on the stove. That is
No,
probably rule number 296 of Blood Bowl.
I agree.
Yep.
So the what is it, to rehash something, but I guess to say that I'm for me to give a thank you out to everyone who showed to my tournament and everything like that. I really appreciate it. I think we had a really good time. I think it went over pretty well. I did some feedback survey stuff, and generally everything was positive for the most part. And we got some good information on kind of what people, at least the people that attended my tournament, kind of want out of Florida Blood Bowl, like what they're looking for in tournaments. So it was kind of enlightening. And I've shared it out through some of the channels where we have some of the kind of the Florida coaches to talk about. So thanks everyone that's out there, if anyone's listening and stuff like that, to that.
This was the Grand Arena Tournament of Champions. If you happen to come across the Facebook page, and I tell you what, that was the first time that I had played in a game club and not a game store. And I have to say that you did a great job with the location, because I thought I loved it. I mean, it was spacious. It was like all the food you could eat. I mean, the club owner was extremely just gracious and hospitable to have us there. I thought it was a great venue.
Yeah, I'm talking. It's my local venue, but yes, I do.
So that's where you play your league.
That's where our league's set up. But that's where the Tampa League currently is out of Grand Arena. So that's where we have our all of our stuff. So yeah, I think it went over without a hitch. I talked to him afterwards. He was very happy with it, so he would be more than happy to host us again. So he was very happy with the thing. He was like, I didn't really have to do anything, and I was like, yeah, we kind of run ourselves. I'm like, we're really used to this. So we come in and we do our thing. So, and I think we're pretty respectful and pretty relatively we're not rowdy. I'm talking, people get a little heat, you get a little, Blood Bowl-y, but we're not rowdy.
Somebody broke the profanity seal. Like everybody was on their best behavior. And then, I think somebody at some point realized, there's really not any kids here yet. And then the profanity seal got broke, and then then it was kind of downhill for a little while. But
I'm sure it was me. I'm the first.
You're the one. Okay.
I am sure I am. I will without a doubt, because I'm the first one. Because profanity is just for me, language is one of those things. Yeah. Well, I look at it and say, and particularly in that environment, that I just want to get it out of me, this ugly emotion that is like.
Oh, so you need an exorcism.
Yeah, well, yeah, and these words just do that. They exercise.
Oh my God. It's not the words, Jim. Let's be honest. It's the dice rolls. That's what brings it all out.
Well, the dice rolls are the cause, right? Okay. And the profanity is the result.
That's true.
And I just don't want to go through the rest of even the next 5 minutes with that terrible feeling of double skulls, staring me in the face. So I just am there, and I don't know what you do with your podcast, so I won't swear now. But I'm fairly sailorish when it comes to the Blood Bowl thing. And it's funny, there were so many things that I was thinking about as we were talking earlier. Is one of the real concerns I had from 15 years ago was, okay, there's this group, and I look around and I see the age, and it's all late 20s, early 30s somethings, and they all began to get settled down and have their, buy their first house, get married, to have their first kids. How it's going to be, who it is, who is the next generation. And when I looked around and saw the grand tournament that was just run, I saw, young people, and I know of young people showing up at very nearly every tournament that's run, who have picked up the interest in Blood Bowl. They see it being played. And so one of the things that NAF has done, and I do think that NAF has been the catalyst to so much.
I agree.
Because they responded to the request of their audience, and tried to help them. Many of them were wanting to run a league. How do you run a league? And the NAF came up with a whole bunch of like the coach locator list to how to run a league, what kind of support the NAF could do. So, and then people, once they start seeing that in their local gaming store. For me, my game store, before I just saw the lovely facilities we just played in. My game store has always been Armada, and for off and on over the last few years, I would run a Blood Bowl league there, and there would always be 7 or 8 people, and I had. For me, there's so many sidelights of this, and like I say again, you can talk about it forever. The painting aspect and the modeling aspect of some of the things that I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to look yet at the tournament that Purple Goo that Jeff Porritt just won over Purple Goo, but the best painted at that, and the Wood Elves
NFC Championship.
Yeah, the NFC Championship that just got completed. I texted Jeff, who's a good friend of mine. We used to be bitter enemies, and now he's a very good friend. And he's another one that the NAF survived sort of several different internal struggles at different times. And Jeff had a very clear vision some decade ago about what he thought we should be doing. And to me, it's a credit to everybody who's still playing a game and still involved and cares about it enough to get passionate about it. Jeff has played the game, has married, has a beautiful, beautiful daughter, and still goes to Nottingham at the NAFC Championship and won one for the old guard. That's what I said to him. I said, "Oh, good, yeah, like won for the old guys, yay!" Because
it's harder to play.
Yeah, Jeff Porritt, in his prime, which wasn't that. I think it's funny to talk about it because there's so many of them in my mind that I remember being number ones. Tim Ibey was the one that first brought my attention. That dear German friend of mine that plays in Tulips in the invitational tournament with me. He was one of the first real number ones that I saw, and his play was brilliant. And then right behind that was Johan Minier, who's the diminutive French genius. Longshot is his NAF name, and he was number one with Wood Elves. He was almost unbeatable. He's one of the first real players that I've seen that was just exquisite with Wood Elves. I mean, he did
bullshit.
Yeah, I know. But he could literally have 3 on the board, and you would still be frightened of him.
I believe it.
I saw that the winner of that tournament, he played Dark Elves. Yep. I think the last Chaos Cup was won by Dark Elves. Yeah. I think ever since the NAF did their you can't ban leader skill, that has really pushed Dark Elves up a thing. Because I think Dark Elves not having rerolls was the hardest thing.
Well, right,
I think Dark Elves have become a real contender, like a real force. It used to be everyone undead and Wood Elves, but Dark Elves have been taking a lot of tournaments lately.
Yep. Yeah, well, I will take credit for being the one that inspired all the changes in the vastly overpowered Chaos Dwarf team of 15 years ago, because I was winning tournaments when I shouldn't have been winning tournaments because of just how vastly overpowered that team was. So I think people go, "Oh my God, look at the old man monkey! He's actually won a tournament, and there's no way." There's no way. It's just because he played CDs, so they nerfed it a little bit.
One of the things, I don't know where you come into this, but I don't know if you were around when they started adding teams, because like when I left, I think there was 14 teams. Now there was 24 when I came back. Now there's 26. But like some of the teams that are considered classic nowadays, like I had to learn. Like I'm like, oh, I had never seen lizardmen. That was something new, and like I had never seen Amazons or Norse. Like these were all things that I had not had a clue, let alone Underworld and Chaos Pack.
Well, right. Those teams, the ones you just mentioned, particularly Lizardman, Norse, Amazon, and it seems like there was either one more elf or one more
Pro elf didn't exist.
Yeah. All of that was part of the push in the 18 months after Resurrection, because the commitment GW made, besides resurrecting the game and making the basic games available, board sets available again, was that they were going to, put out new teams and let the NAF kind of do that. And that's what the rules committee, the BBRC, was originally about. They were going to design it for both league play and tournament play. They were going to design a set of rules for them. They were going to come up with teams and begin to work on the skills and introduce new skill sets. And, I never will forget going to Tom's Gen Con tournament. And up until the most recent Chaos Cups, the Gen Con tournament was the biggest U.S. tournament. And his brother, I always accuse it of nepotism, but I can't prove it. His brother Dennis, I think, won the first or one or two. He won two in a row, and whether it was the first and second or second and third with Lizardmen, and everybody's going, "Oh, they're overpowered."
I think Lizardmen won it maybe this last year. I think, but I don't. Yeah, I
can. I confess, I'm just not. And I never have been, and I purposely stated that early on because I was going to limit my participation, although it was overwhelming at times, just being the treasurer. I said, I am not going to be a rules monger. Tom, it's apparent to me, because I just met Tom, and then I said, it's apparent to me that Gallic is quite the rules monger and will argue rules till way early in the morning, and I don't give a damn about any of that stuff. I think that's what makes me a decent referee, is that, okay, here's the rule set that we've been given for this tournament. You all know it. And so I don't want to have any problems, because it's like at that point, once the tournament starts, there's no real discussions. I know, there might be a language problem, and I think we've run into that over the times when I've had a Spanish guy arguing with a German, and neither one of them understand each other. But
and yet they still play.
Oh yeah, well, and that was part of the other. I mean, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more. Somebody's passion was that they would translate rule sets, and then the NAF was just an absolutely perfect repository for that kind of information. So again, if somebody was looking for a rule set and they moved from here to there, or they needed to have this available, the NAF has become a really, really great resource depository for the game and for the history. I mean, I shouldn't say what's the history, because there are some secrets that I promise you will never come out. The evidence has been destroyed. The secret, there's only a handful, and I promise you that. But it's nothing serious or earth shattering. We got through all the beginnings, and the best part for me is to watch just every weekend the NAF post, like, okay, there's this tournament, this tournament, this tournament, this tournament. I mean, it's just you can't. You have to work really hard to avoid playing Blood Bowl if you're in certain parts of the world.
I usually do those posts every week.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jim, aren't you their hype man?
Yeah, I'm part of the media team, and that's one of the things that I started doing. And there are occasional weekends where just I don't get to put the tournament roundup together, but I generally tomorrow is when I'll try and get it out. And I love looking at it every week, because it's like there are 13 to 15 countries that over this weekend, everyone is playing Blood Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, not to get on a tangent or anything, but, while I have you on this AMA, Jim, maybe you can weigh in with your opinion on this. So I've always been a champion of the NAF, because I just think it's a great organization, and I felt like without them, Blood Bowl wouldn't have survived. GW, kind of shelving the game, or however, whatever you want to call it. Everybody has their own opinion on it, but I just feel like without the NAF, it wouldn't have survived. Nor do I think it would have been able to come back the way that it did, when the box set came out in 2016. For me, in my opinion, it seemed like when they had the World Cup in Italy, that's kind of what brought. I mean, and you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, it was already in the works," but I feel like that's what kind of got GW's attention again, to show them that, hey, this is still a viable game. Maybe we need to kind of, get that back out there. I mean, that was a huge event. Were you at that event?
Again, and was there in Lucca, and
yeah. And that was a huge turnout. That was like 900 plus coaches, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was nearly the 1,000, and they were actually capable of getting up to the 1,000. There was the last few. There were probably 3 teams that ended up not being able to come after. But the first one, the GW, the one we had at GW, and
we got some.
Did we lose him?
Nah, nope. Yeah, we got a little bit of.
I think we have some parents.
Is it me? I mean, I don't. Again, I'm not sure.
You're back.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. In 2007, the proof to the NAF at that point, because the Euro Bowl had shown just a remarkable interest in the team concept. The Euro Bowl had been going on for 3 years then, I think, and every year each country was designing their own way of constructing the team. The French had very formal, like, okay, there's going to be this playoff and this, and that's how they did the team. The Dutch were kind of like, okay, you're on. Okay, that's the team. And everybody had their way of doing it, but everybody loved the concept of showing up 6 players showing up in shirts. Well, I think at that time it might have only been 4. But anyway, everybody showing up in shirts, everybody cheering on, and then they developed and worked out the scoring system. And from then it was like, okay, now this is a team tournament that they're playing every year, and it gets the interest of 100 players. Well, okay, if we're going to have a team tournament and maybe call it a world championship, then we could probably do this, and we could use it. The discussion began to happen, and Dave Downs had just kind of taken over as president then, and he was kind of like, okay, if you want to put this together, let's do it. So I was over in England several times anyway, and then sat down with the GW people and said, okay, we want food, we want a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we want this, and this, and how many people will the main hall hold? Well, the main hall is 200 people. You're not going to have that many people, are you? And I said, well, the interest, we think we could probably do half of it. Okay, we'll give you the main hall on this weekend and stuff. So we set it up, and everyone was quite accepted. Ian Williams, Double Skulls, was writing the software to run the team, how to put in the individual play and then score the team, and then so it was all coming together. But within 3 weeks of the announcement, there's like 70 teams already showing up. So like 3 weeks of the announcement, there's like 150 coaches already doing it. So I go back to GW and go,
we're gonna need more room.
How many did you say is this gonna hold?
Yeah.
And they go. So I said, well, we've never had more than 150 at any other of their gaming systems, and I'm talking about 40K. I'm talking about every other gaming system that they had. They've never had more at any of their traveling road shows where they go and say. I mean, they've never had more than 150 players. So suddenly we're right at that, and we haven't really started. So I'm going like, well, I think we're going 200. And then so within another 3 weeks, we're at 170, 180. And I go back to James, trying to think of his last name now, but just real easy. But he just could. He just was like, "Are you sure?" I go, "I've got money in the bank from these people. Are you kidding?" It's like these guys have laid their money down and they're coming. So it's 170, 176, or at that point, and I go, "So 200's it, huh?" And I go, "Yeah." And so the next time I'm over, and we're getting to the buns, I'd happen to go down to, and there's an English pub just about 400 yards from GW outside the entrance to it, called the White. Now I'm gonna forget, White Stag, I think. They real nice, bigger than usual English pub, and they have a separate host room or what I would say catering facility room there where they can host weddings and receptions and all that kind of stuff. So I go to them and go, what would it take for me to, what kind of deposit would it take for me to do that? And how many would you be willing to host? And this is, of course, like we're playing during the daytime. Like we're talking about being like, you got to open at 8 o'clock. You got to basically stay.
Yeah.
You got to staff the place and do it till 6 o'clock and that stuff. So they come up with a number, and I literally hand this guy, because we don't have a check. And the NAF is still unsophisticated enough. We don't have a checkbook. So I hand this manager a stack of English 100-pound notes, and he goes,
"This is
okay,
shitty. Yeah,
okay, I could do this." And the fun, I mean, there's lots of funny stories. So we ended up, by the time it's all over, we filled the 200 in the main. I'm going to probably tell this story a half a dozen more times over. You'll hear it again because it's one of my favorite stories.
So you're playing at both sites?
Or say again?
You were playing at both sites. You were playing at GW and this pub, or?
Oh yeah, because
like,
you could.
So that was overflow. The pub
right.
Was overflow. Okay.
Right. What we could do, because you could walk in about 15 minutes, you could walk from one site to the other.
Oh my God.
And we told coaches, there's somewhere on the old threads, there's the conversations like, okay, there's all these teams that are like, oh, I didn't get in. I really want to go. And I go, well, here's the deal. We can fit 72 more coaches in this pub, but you're going to have to, if you're playing down there, you're going to have to walk in between, because when I'm not setting up, but we looked at the price of like getting a shuttle bus or stuff. No, we're not going to do that. These guys can pick up their shit. I don't know if I could say that on your post. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Okay. And they can walk back and forth between this, and we'll get the cell phones working and make sure that everybody we have like a set of referees and things down there, and we'll serve lunch down there and that stuff. The funny part about that is that part of the deal that I said with the pub, because I said, look, my guys drink.
That's what I was just thinking that the entire time. I'm like, when does the alcohol start flowing?
And I said, I can get it. I don't want to disobey any law, because I don't know if you can drink really before 10 o'clock or some like early hour you couldn't go before. I said, but by the time lunchtime, I know you can drink by lunchtime, and they're going to do it. And then they have the courtyard, and people would just stay there the whole time.
Yeah, it's easy money for them. You're promising them a packed house.
So I said, you're not. I said, this is busier than your Saturday night with drinking people. Okay. So I said, you need to promise me that on Thursday, when they show up, because they're going to go there and then play 3 days worth of games, that you're going to have enough beer. Oh yeah. Yeah. Now this is now in England. If you're familiar with the concept, they have the brewery pubs, and this was one of them. This was, I think, a Strongbow brewing company, the ones that do it. And, oh yeah, the brewery's right there. We can get stuff in. I said, you need to load it in ahead of time. If you order 10 kegs, you need to probably have at least 15 for 3 nights for the Thursday night for the meet and greet, Friday, and even again Saturday at lunchtime. They ran out of beer.
Oh no.
And so luckily GW, they did the same thing. GW ran out of beer the first 2 nights, but GW has they pick up a phone, whatever GW wants they get. So they had stuff. Apparently this manager was having to like go up to like vice presidential level down at the White Stag, because these guys are going, wait a minute, you want how many more kegs of beer? And it was quite a big deal for him to like do this. So it's just a funny sideline about this. Goes back to like we put all these numbers together and say this is the economic impact of what we can do. This is what we were able to bring to, because we counted up the hotel rooms, we counted up the food service that was brought in, because we fed everybody. We didn't really feed them a breakfast, but we did have like little sausage cakes and orange juices and donuts and that kind of stuff, and coffee, lots of coffee. And then we fed them a lunch. We had a catered lunch, and then everybody could come to GW, and they had a ticket, and they could have a dinner. So I mean, that first one was just to prove that we could do it, and I'm very pleased with the way that all the people were committed to making it a success, because we were really on the line with it. I mean, we were
yeah.
We had a lot of tournament experience from the people that were there. A lot of the England people that had been running tournaments for a number of years at that point. Been doing like 4 or 5 years with a solid 50 to 60 to 80, 90 player tournaments. But to bring together that, and then to bring it into the team, and then coordinate it and get all the operations together, it just was an amazing set of work, and it's something that I look back on very fondly. It's like, of all of the things I've done for business on the same scale or even larger, but this was just a work of passion and pride, and everybody just came together really wonderfully. And so the next World Cup, everybody's like, oh my God, oh look at this, like all the pictures, and there's a wonderful moment in the ceremonies, and you can still find it on YouTube if you type in Blood Bowl World Cup Nottingham. I think it comes up with the winning French team singing the Marseillaise, the French national anthem, and everybody's just like singing along. And there's like, and nobody left. I mean, there was still better than 200 coaches still in the main room, hanging off the rafters and sitting on floors and that stuff, all to see the award of this stuff. It was it's a very fun time for those of us who were there. And then the real challenge after that was, okay, well, what's the encore? I said, I'm not doing this again for 4 years. It's not happening. I said, we can make this really special. We can do all the other things and get those in, but we need to really get the next one right, because the next one we needed to do by ourselves. GW had been a wonderful support and a wonderful help, but there was still this kind of us and them a little bit. There was still kind of like,
even back then?
What's that?
Even back then, it was like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was the NAF. Even though they had begun to work with the NAF and begun to appreciate, how quickly this was coming together, they were still catching up to us, and they still thought that they could they could run the tournament better. They still thought that we could that they could host the Blood Bowl Grand Tournament better.
Let me put things into perspective. So at this point in time, when you do this tournament, is Blood Bowl now under Specialist Games range, and are they still putting out new materials and content, or is that all ceased?
Oh no, it's still at that point. Let's see, 07, yeah, 07 would have been kind of almost the height of, but height? Okay. Yeah, it was still. I think Andy was still there. Jake was still there. I think they were still pretty much parts of it. We had done the Three Kingdoms, I think, either just before then. So everybody was still feeling really, really good about it. GW went through its own exorcism. Had nothing really to do with Blood Bowl, but had to do with the fact that their main gaming systems were starting to bankrupt them. And
that was around the time that I noticed, because I would go to Games Day in Baltimore, and they stopped having it like I went there like 2 or 3 years in a row with press passes because at the time I had my own magazine and I dealt with Andy and Jake and they were really great. And I was a peon. I mean, a little online PDF based magazine, but they were golden to me. So I couldn't thank them enough. But they would send me press passes and I would go and cover games day and there was hardly any Blood Bowl there at all. Like I would go and bring my teams and go to play, and me and my buddy that I would go there with, me and him would be sitting there, and people would walk by and are like, "Oh, look at that! Someone's playing Blood Bowl," and that was it. There was no tournaments or anything. Like we were like the last holdouts.
Right. I think that the writing was already on the wall, and even at that first World Cup. It wasn't soon after that first Jake and then Andy left, because I don't think they were at all. They might have been there for 11 in some capacity, but there was not that specialist games in input and impact like it was. But it was GW's own internal financials that were the real problem, just because specialist games just got the axe just because it just couldn't generate. There was a whole new set of managers, most of which came from a department store background. One of the big department store chains there. I think there was 10 or 12 of those management people, and then they didn't understand games and they really didn't care. So GW went through its own reworking of things. So
that was some dark times for Games Workshop. That's when a lot of people left, and that's when the historical line went under too. And like I think that's when the Perry brothers left, and that was just bad. And they just basically said like we're going to go down to 2 lines for the most part. I guess 3 with Lord of the Rings.
Right, Lord of the Rings was they viewed as their savior, and I think to some degree it was, at least it gave them some creative input. But there's a lot of people who were writing a lot of the back content and went kind of on their own. But then there was one event that I particularly liked. Black Library sort of came alive around that time, and really I think, I don't want to know, it's really cheap to make a mass market size paperback. I know this because I've been in the book business for most of my adult life. And so I think the Black Library, I think Gav Tharp and a bunch of those people began to really write a lot of the backstory that people were just dying for. They were just loving all of the that stuff. So I think Black Library.
Some of those are really good. Yeah, I've read like the Gaunt's Ghosts and stuff like that.
Oh,
like
yeah.
They're good. They're fun.
They're fun. They're definitely they're every bit as fun as a Harlequin romance or any of that other stuff that people get into. And I know, just because the margins in those things, if you're selling 30 or 40,000 of those, you're making decent bank. So and they were cranking them out. It just seemed like you could not keep up with a particular storyline before they did it. I think that was also, what was the in GW, the traitor, the Horus Heresy started, and and even I, though I don't do any of the 40K stuff or whatever, or the space the Space Center stuff of it. Even I sort of read some of those and was intrigued with the quality. There's just some good storytellers at GW, and they had been developing those stories, and I think really wanting to tell those stories for a long time. And Black Library gave them a chance to kind of do that, and so some of them just turned to being authors.
It's its own mythos. One of the things I like about Blood Bowl, that it's the last vestiges of the old fantasy world, because fantasy's gone now. They've now moved on to Age of Sigmar. They blew up the world. But I read the most recent release, the Spike magazine, and it's talking about all the stuff from the old fantasy game. So they can say that it's not the old fantasy world, but it's the old fantasy world, and we all know.
Right. I have a story of a team called the Redlegs, and I eventually will put it out in sort of serial form, because it basically, to my way of thinking, tells the story of how a Blood Bowl team of different players and and Ray come together in a backwater somewhere and suddenly find themselves playing for the NAF championship in some way. I mean, it just I will tell that story, and I will even paint that team maybe at some point. But it is so there's a lot that happened then. But the biggest thing I was going to say before we went off on that tangent was the second World Championship was really just for the NAF people involved to prove that we could do it without GW, because there was still some suspicion, and the NAF, a lot of NAF people, a lot of time and time again. So they weren't willing to say that, okay, if we let you do it, that, we trust you to do it well and do it right. So Andre and Niels and just a number of again, part of that whole Utrecht to Amsterdam Blood Bowl League that had been going on before 2000 and before the NAF. All of those guys kind of like, took the last puff of it. Yeah, we can do this, no problem. And in their only too cool way that Amsterdam people handled it, it was brilliant. They found this old renovated church, this cathedral that had been turned into a kind of resort hosting. Again, it was a meeting place. It was a place where you held conventions and that kind of stuff. But they were set up for dinners. They were set up, but it was an incredible space. Again, you can find the pictures in the some YouTube video of it. But it was three levels. If you can imagine, there was a ground floor level, a second level that had a rail. I mean, it wasn't a level. There was a big center space, a big chamber, anteroom, if you will. And so the second level and the third level kind of went around this railing. It was about a 15-foot wide aisle that went all the way in a horseshoe from the around the sides of it. And so there were 3 levels of Blood Bowl players all stacked in this room with a PA system that went to every room, and then there were players stacked around. So we went from the 272 to 526 or 22 or 26, 26, 36, something like that. We just about doubled.
Wow. Well, that definitely proved you guys were able to do it without them.
And that was the point where I just kind of relaxed and said, okay, number one, I can leave being the treasurer. I can leave being part of the old guard staff, and because Dave and the committee that he had formed to help him run it, clearly it was a bunch of the more level-headed English guys that were in charge now, and they did wonderful and tied it all together, and then it was just, okay, now what do we do? And it led to Luca 7, 11, 15, and 15, and say what you will about how disorganized or whatever the Italian terrible Italian mythologies are, but when it comes to gaming and cons and fun, the Italians have their shit together.
Oh, I didn't hear anything negative about. All I heard about Italy was that it was the biggest one. It broke almost 1,000 coaches. It got GW's attention. I heard nothing but great things about it. So I wish I was there.
Well, the funny part about it is that in between those two is when essentially the French company that developed essentially the online or the
Cyanide,
when Cyanide came out and essentially stole all the artwork, everything, and then dared GW to do anything about it, and kind of won. I mean, they got GW to say, okay, you can keep up what you're doing, but you got to pay us this royalty. And Cyanide said, okay.
I think that was smart on GW's part because they're playing the long game. I mean,
Oh
that
yeah,
game
it
literally reintroduced the concept of Blood Bowl to a whole nother generation who would eventually, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them be like, oh, you can play this on a tabletop.
Oh yeah. Oh no. That discussion was probably one of the 2 or 3 most important and worrisome and anxiety-ridden discussions, particularly later as late as it was in the NAF's history at that point, because this was only a few years ago.
Right.
Like, oh my God, this is gonna do us in. We're gonna be irrelevant and all that stuff. I'm going like, not if you handle it right. I said, if you invite them in and you work together and do this kind of stuff, and now you're right. It's been a perfect way for those of us who didn't bring a team with them. I can go to my iPad and play a game. I mean, I can.
It's amazing.
I can do all that kind of stuff. And then when somebody says, "Oh, isn't this a cool game?" I said, "Oh, you ain't seen nothing till you see the board game of this." What? There's a board game? Oh yeah.
Let me get you hooked on the addiction of buying miniatures and painting miniatures, buying dice and having way more stuff than you'll ever possibly need. But let me bring you into the fold there, kid.
Oh yeah, that's it. The sidebar industry. I mean, Tom's made a living at it now, and or is working with him through Impact and that stuff. And
well, before all these other vendors came about, like your Grebo and your who else is out there, Wiley Miniatures, and like there was always Impact. And like I remember, after really you couldn't easily get any of the GW stuff, like you could get a ton of stuff from Tom, and he's always been there.
Yeah, it was. I love that guy to death, and we've had our bitter disagreements over the year. He is as passionate about being the rules as I am not being the rules, and not about that.
He is the yin to your yang, and vice versa.
It's just sort of, but we laugh about it, and I've had dinner at his house a number of times and seen some of the most prized and storied collectibles. Even though I think I have 1 or 2 myself, his basement dwarfs anything I've seen anywhere else, and I've even including the Games Workshop secret little skunk works that they have their painters and all that kind of stuff. I have the original Thrud. I have the original Thrud figure painted by GW and that stuff. That's my one biggie. But Tom has entire teams. He's got just so much that you go back to those original magazines and the photographs that were taken, and he's got the team sitting right there in his basement. It's just a pleasure to see it.
He might have to open that up and sell tickets like for the Holy Land. people making pilgrimages to his house to see
Tom and his wife Kim have been wonderfully supportive of one another, but she's always said that you can't go on any of these international, because of course he's like me. I mean, I think Tom was probably even invited to go overseas before I was, but he never could. And I think we've got him set up so that he's going to also referee in Germany. And I think the deal was that Kim had to come along.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, this is sort of like I'm not sure if that's I'm not 100% sure that he knows that there is a referee shirt and all the accoutrements, if you will, if he shows up and if he's there. I know that he's still in conversation with Milo. God, there's another whole ex-BBRC member who's now living in Switzerland number of years. He's the one that owned the original bloodbowl.net website that we have instead of the naf.net like it was. It was bloodbowl.com, I guess it was. And I remember all the legal hassle we had to go through to get it from him or whatever.
Yeah, what was the Talk Fantasy Football site before it was Talk? Was it?
It was Talk Blood Bowl. It was
Okay, yeah.
TBB. TBB was what that one was, and and it might have even had one more because it came straight off of what were those old email sites, the ones the or
News
bulletin
groups?
board, the old no the yeah the news groups and bulletin
Yeah.
boards.
Yeah.
There was one that was set up originally for, and this predated me. This was the one I was mentioning that people like Krister and Phil Bowen and Tom were all a part of, just kind of like sending, like we gotta keep this game alive. So
They did. They did with stone knives and bear skins.
well,
Star
it's a
Trek episode.
yeah, it's a fascinating history to in a world that is two-dimensional and electronic and zeros and ones and that stuff. It is a real blood, sweat, and tears kind of three-dimensional, and that's the reason I think I like the painting, and I like, and to me the camaraderie and that stuff, which it goes back to the 3KC being about a lot of that, because the teams that I know I saw, because we had a very serious, I treated it very seriously. The best painting team, there were three or four that were brought around that people had clearly worked on very hard and for just devoted some best efforts to, and you just saw some brilliant skill in a way that you would never in a million years see in the digital world.
Yeah, it's always impressive to see somebody's team, and from and I almost feel guilty even saying such things, because back in the day, it was like, it's a trade-off. As you get older, you have more time and less money when you're younger, and you have less time and more money when you're older. So I used to paint, and now it's like I don't have time to paint. But I've met a lot of great painters that I've had paint some of my teams for me. That once I kind of finished with them and I knew I wouldn't be playing with again, I've sold them and moved on from them. But I've met a lot of great, talented people, who have done that. And like these days, it's a lot different. I mean, there are so many professional, what's the word that they use? Like commercial paint, not commercial, but
Right, I know it. Yeah, the
yeah,
people that make a living at it,
yeah,
people that
and
that
they can
charge
do
for
it.
it, and they're really skillful and they're really good. And I love it when somebody antes up the, what is it, $300 or $400 now to get a
Yeah,
really
and that's about
fantastic,
average.
yeah, to
That's
get a
much average.
fantastic team painted up. I collected them. There is my favorite team that I own is a orc team that won the that won the Hungarian version of game day. It wasn't quite as organized as an official game day, but there is or was, I should say, a young man named Andreas Chescu, who was considered to be just a genius painter of figures, dead now, and
Oh,
he painted the orc team, and this has the little golden goblin or whatever they had as the golden statue, or the because he won the best painted at that particular event, and it's from Budapest, and I followed and tried to collect as much of his stuff as I could because it was just exquisite. And people don't remember our would have been first vice president, and actually I said Woody was the second president. He actually wasn't. He's the third, because for a short time, Anthony Watts, who was John's vice president, took over when John stepped down. And so Anthony Watts was just one of the most brilliant painters any of us have ever seen. Humble, uh, big, gentle, and he could, with just a few strokes of a brush, just do amazing work. And unfortunately, I don't know if Anthony used to. For a time, he worked for GW Canada, but I don't know if he's with them anymore. But just that Toronto, Montreal. There's another whole thing. Toronto, Montreal, I think still has a fairly strong competition going on to it. But back in the day, oh my God, those guys went crazy. They had a bunch of people from upstate New York and Niagara Falls and that stuff going up to those tournaments. I mean, the Spike, when they resurrected Spike and had it in Toronto, I remember flying into New York, picking up John Lewis, the president, driving and arguing the whole way
Nice.
with him all the way as we crossed into Canada and going into Toronto. And then there's still a big group in Montreal. Glenn, I don't know whether
Glenn Hortz.
yeah, Glenn, I think it's his last name, is the big, wonderful Mohawk, the most gentle guy in the world. I love that man to death. He's just kept that one going in Montreal. There is just it's just a play. Yeah.
After the 24, 26, after I achieved that, Mark Perry and I, that's like every year we have our bucket list of like this year it's our first time at Chaos Cup, and what else? We want to do Oklahoma. We want to do Spike. There's so many things that, like, you know, just a bucket list of Blood Bowl tournaments, because they just have developed such a reputation.
And that's the fun part now, that you can even say, even in North America, it's a pleasure, because those weren't there. I mean, I can remember, let's see, the first 5 tournaments I played, there weren't 10 people in them. I think the Dragon Con of that time had a Blood Bowl tournament going on, and I think there were maybe 6. There was a tournament I remember in Charlotte, North Carolina, that was 5 people. But I mean, there were just these pockets of people that just, oh yeah, Blood Bowl, I really like that game. I'm going to do it. And then so I was like a NAF like fanatic then. I was like, yeah, they've got this online thing, and you can go and
I'm still fanatical about it. I'm always getting people. I think it's funny when people are like, I never heard of the NAF. And I'm like, how long have you been playing Blood Bowl? They're like, oh, 10 years or so, like on and off. And I'm like, and you've never heard of the NAF? And they're like, nope. Let me enlighten you, brother.
Seriously, I had not heard of it before maybe 2015. And I had been playing Blood Bowl since 93, 94.
Then I'm just going to look at it and say, is your search engine broken? Come on. Is your Google really not the same as my Google? Because I can find the NAF if I need to.
You just play in your little insular groups. You know, I played with my buddies and I played at the game shop, but I didn't know that there was a worldwide thing going on.
Exactly. You would never imagine. I mean, if
right,
you're there,
I never would have thought it.
You never thought that this thing is actually. I mean, it'd be like a Magic guy in Key West. Oh, what's this deck of cards in this game room? Oh, okay, cool. Oh yeah, we used to play this stuff. If you didn't know that there was like this Magic worldwide crazy shit going on, you would never do it. Or if you didn't know, if you ever came across the game of chess for the first time, you mean they really organize a world championship for this? Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm talking. Games Workshop has other specialist games, but there's no equivalent of the NAF for Necromunda. There's no equivalent of the NAF for Battlefleet Gothic. You know,
well,
like
I think. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, Joe.
No problem.
But I was just going to say, I think that's what the hope with specialist games is that they could get those other smaller systems to the level that Blood Bowl is. And I hate to say it, but because I had this discussion with Phil Bowen about Guild Ball on the same lines. It's like, why isn't Guild Ball's every bit as fun, and it's just, you know, it's just a small. I go, it doesn't connect with real life to me in the same way that Blood Bowl, football, there's something about it that just doesn't, or there's something about Blood Bowl that just connects in a way that I have yet to see another gaming system connect. And I can't figure out exactly what it is, because if I did, I would be making that system right now.
I think the part of the thing that the difference between what I've seen with Guild Ball, because I've gone and watched some Guild Ball games. I was thinking about getting into Guild Ball when I was in a Blood Bowl drought, when there was no Blood Bowls. I was like, maybe I'll try this. It's kind of like Blood Bowl. But I think part of it is the fact that it's almost too serious, like, because Blood Bowl has like a humorous aspect to it, and I think that that's part of the fun That there's a fun part to it, because even if your guy dies, it's still hilarious.
Yeah.
But in Guild Ball, it's much more like, we're gonna kill you, and like there's not a lot of like silliness to it, which I think, and like I said, you can really relate it to football, whereas Guild Ball's more akin to soccer, which I don't think is going to go over nearly as well, at least in America, as football does.
Yeah, I think that's the closest reason, is that it's part of the goofiness and the backstory,
Right.
and that preceded Blood Bowl. That just charms. I mean, I for one hate the plague cards or the Wabba cards, but I get them. I do. I mean, I get the whole idea that a magician can toss a lightning bolt out there and blow my guy up, or like, what is it? I was playing. Oh yeah, the bombardier guy that blew my guy up when I was playing at the Grand Tournament. Like, what the hell? He does that. So I get it. I mean, that part of it is just the wild and zany stuff. While at the same time, I'm like, I don't need any more rules, and I don't want to use the playing cards and that stuff. There's a lot of people who do. I mean, there's a lot of people I know that play goblins. They don't expect to win the game, and that's perfectly okay with them.
Yeah, they just want to be an agent of chaos.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
They just want to have a story to tell after the game, and I get it. I think that Blood Bowl has a perfect way to describe 2 hours of your time in a story format. Like, you're not going to believe this. What happened? I was up 2-1, and then this guy he picked up a guy, threw him with the ball. He landed on his feet, and he went and scored a touchdown and tied the game.
I think you could sum it up with competitive, but not serious.
Yeah, but it one of the other side. I mean, just as I say that, there's Chet Zazonsky's image, and Chet is another member of the original BBRC, one of the brightest. He's the one that used to write very serious game theory styled treatises about how to play bubble efficiently and maximize your chances. And he had all the stats. He would do all of the, like, this, your roll of against the dice of this is going to be 15 out of 36. And he had all the mathematics. I mean, that's how Chet is and was, and he's one of the most cheerful, lovable guys in real life. But when he's a statistician, mathematics person,
we have a Chet. He's
on the other side.
Yes.
We have our own Chet.
The winner.
Actuary.
Yes, the winner of our tournament, of the Grand Arena tournament, he just passed his actuary, and I think he said that he played close to what? Was it 100 or 1,000? I don't remember. Pre-games before that tournament, where he played to get the mathematically best team that he could.
This is Steve. Is it Steve? Right? Is that, if I got his name right?
Yes, Steven.
Yeah, okay, all right, okay.
He's the Skaven coach who played Josh's Goblins and beat him. What was it, 7-1?
Something like that. Something akin to that.
And I was like, and he's not playing Wood Elves.
Well, here's where the personalities become different. I think Steven, from my observations at Grand Tournament, wonderful player, obviously, and has it all down. But the roll of the dice, I mean, it's still a dice game. And Chet would roll. He would roll a double ones and kind of go, he would just like lose that. I have a sneaky suspicion that Stevens would be a little bit more animated if that happened at the wrong moment.
It's just one of those things. The math guys, you can work out every math formula you want, but sometimes luck's not going to be with you.
Oh yeah, it's a dice game, brother. It's you're gonna. That's why I'm not. If I believe in any gods at all, Nuffle is the god I believe in. Absolutely, there is no doubt.
First time I sat down to play with one of the coaches in Florida when I moved down here, his name was Nick, and very smart guy, and he's math minded, let's say. So like he'd be going to do something, he'd be like, "Oh, the odds of successful," and me, I'm like Han Solo. I'm like, "Kid, don't tell me the odds."
That's right.
That's exactly how I feel. Like I want to do something. I want to have fun. I want to roll some dice. I want to see what happens. Yeah, and I want to tell a story. Like it's part of the allure of the game. I mean, there are times where I really want to win, but at the end of the day, the game's all about having fun. So
I was listening to the Two Drunk Flings podcast,
mm-hmm.
and one of the guys, he's just like, yeah, I throw it to my Minotaur, and everyone's like, why do you do that? And he's like, because I'll catch it on a 5 or a 6, and like then my Minotaur has the ball, and that's how some people play, man. It's not statistically the best, but it's really cool when it happens.
I do that when I'm out of rerolls. I have a tendency to play balls, as I call it, balls to the wall Blood Bowl, when I'm out of rerolls and I'm down 1-0 and it's time to, okay, I've got to ignore the odds here and do it.
I think that worked for you at Grand Arena, because you played like you had 4 guys on the pitch for an entire half and still and you were up. You were blowing.
That was the match against.
You were blowing John Alberto's mind.
Yeah. John walked away with 20-some casualties, and you ran the board with him with only 4 guys.
Well, it's part of that. Part of that, of course, is just having played the game long enough and hopefully knowing where to do it. And part of it too is listening even to the math. I mean, the mathematicians have a valid point. Is that you can put, there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's 8 places to leave a player next to another player. And depending upon where you leave it and where that block will push him and all that, I mean, there's a lot of things that would happen. One of the best games I ever played, or best, I guess, sort of intellectual exercises I ever did with Jake Thornton, is to sit at his house drinking and working out Blood Bowl puzzles that we could publish. And it's like, okay, here's the setup, and it's the white team. It's the Orc team's ball, and they have to score. They only get 1 die. They only get 1 die, and they don't roll more than a 4. And they only get 1 4, and they have to, you had to put very serious, of course, limits. How do the Orcs score doing this? And it was fascinating. It's like talking to somebody about a 1-turn score, and they're going like, that's not possible. And they're going, yes, given the right setup and the right blocking sequence, if you get your opponent to do it the way you want them to, you can set it up so that you can get your 9 movement plus 2 go for it stuff to get another 2 squares out of it and score.
That
chain push. Yep.
Yeah.
Those chain pushes, man, they make my eyes cross when I look at them. I'm no, I don't think I can do that.
Well, I think I told. Well, I don't know if I told you. I'm going to tell it now so it'll be recorded, and then I can shut up about it. I was in Paris in the last round of the Rendezvous tournament, the Rendezvous 3 tournament. And there's a wonderful friend of mine whose NAF nickname is Caducee. And he's very much like Stephen and the mathematical guys. He's known among the French as kind of being a professor and like, you do this or you do that or whatever. And but very well respected. I mean, he's a good player. And I was down 2-1 on the last play, and I'm going, I can't do it. I may as well just reach across, shake his hand, take the loss, and be done with it. But we had been playing, because we were both fairly studious. We were one of the last people to finish, and on this by the time we got to this last pay, there were 40 at least French coaches and some of the other international players. Chris Schmidt, who is Sputnik, who is one of the best, and was also ranked number 1 at various points in his career. And the reason I bring him up is that I heard this very distinct German voice under his hand, if you can imagine, because you're not supposed to coach, you're not supposed to help each other. Kind of said, "You can do it, Jim," like this, and the French people kind of go, what? What if somebody just say something? All the French coaches are going like, what? And all of a sudden, I saw Chris, and he was on the other behind Caducee, but facing me, and he just kind of nodded, and I said, "Okay, I got to really look." And there was this wild ass like, "Okay, knock up." I mean, he had the ball. I got to knock it down, pick it up, hand it off, throw the ball, da 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 da. But as luck would have it, and is probably one of the handful of times in my entire Blood Bowl playing history that everything worked out perfect. Everything was okay. I see it. And it was like I'd had a 2-die block against. I mean, I don't think I ever had to roll less than a 4. And it's still with the 2. Oh, it was sprint. Oh, the Minotaur. That's right. Minotaur had to end up with the ball. Not Minotaur. Bull Centaur had to end up with the ball and then had to use his sprint. I think he had sprint. Right? Bull Centaur. Had to use a sprint to get to the end zone, and it all worked. And it all like did this crazy ass like pick up the ball, hand off. Bull Sprintar goes for it 3 times to get to the end zone to tie. And I just never will forget the last die is rolled. It's a 6. And the whole room erupted. The whole place just went like, "Oh my God!" I mean, "Oh my dude, oh my God, incredible!" I never will forget that. It's the one time too that my good friend Simon Merton, who has visited me, and friends have visited me here in the state. I have this wonderful picture of him sitting in this French academy that we played at, which is a wonderful ground. Him after almost all-nighter, sitting on a stone set of steps wrapped in nothing but a duvet, a blanket. He had nothing around him but a blanket. And him is kind of like searching for or like going like, "Oh, I need coffee," after drinking Kronenbergs all night. So yes, there are probably enough of us older that have gotten like we don't do a lot of that anymore, but we will time it so that we're doing it at the right times.
Nice.
But those are the friendships, and that's what I get out of it. I play. There's the longest running tournament on record in Blood Bowl is called Tulips, and it is by invitation only. And I'm very lucky, I think, to have been included in that group now for a number of years. And we go to Amsterdam, and we find a place if the weather's nice. We play out in one of the Portuguese tapas bars. And if the weather's not nice, we all generally rent a houseboat, and we'll just play on the boat. It's just a wonderful time for a small town guy who's had a chance to see the world, and this game has become part of it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the overall community in general. Just what the NAF does. You know, like I said, I've met so many people now that I consider my friends through this organization that it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, this game and the fact that we organized this whole tournament way to get together, and because of just the nature of the people involved, you just don't find the angst-ridden, anxiety-ridden, angry people, or whatever you want to call them. You generally find a group of people that just love the game and are willing to smile about it and move on, and then afterwards talk about the plays and the dice, and find a way to be very human with one another and build friendships. And the communities, the individual communities around Blood Bowl players, and small game shops, all the way to like I say, the Florence League. I mean, wives, girlfriends, the interested people from the neighborhood. I mean, it is a scene, and there's no other way to describe it. And I have seen it. I think about Luca and go, just how marvelous just in terms of setup that was. I mean, it was just, we don't have those kinds of spaces generally. I mean, the space was given to the NAF and the organizers for free.
Wow.
They were part of the big Comic-Con that is the biggest comics convention in Europe, and they had put it as part of that, and the whole city welcomed. The mayor came out. I mean, it was just
That's
quite a scene.
I've organized conventions before, and that's usually the killer is the space cost. So if you can get the space cost covered, I've had one big convention that we did that if we got X amount of people to get hotels, we got the space for free. Well, you're really pressured to get that spot because the difference between free space and having to pay for space is gigantic.
Yeah, and that's like, I go back to my comment some time ago where I just felt like when they charge. So I mean, I want the Blood Bowl community to appreciate that, you know, putting on a tournament of that size at least is huge amount of work, and not just work for one or two, but work for 15 or 20 really. And not just, I mean, that's the reason we did it 4 years apart, is just that, you know, they're just now they finished the rule set, and they've done all that. They've got the city, that stuff done. Now it's time for the players to honor that commitment, because like I say, if for some reason Austria only has 200 players, they're, you know, that might be the last World Cup, and that would be a shame.
I somehow don't think that's going to happen. I think Blood Bowl's bigger now than it was at the last World Cup because of the new release and everything like that. I can't imagine that I'm talking, even if it did go down, I can't imagine going down by a significant amount. Yeah.
I mean, I think I forget. I think they did the break even number, and it is somewhere less than that, because I yell at them sometimes. I try not to, because it's their game, but I'm going, I said, you've got to be conservative. You've got to not jeopardize things. And I think the number, I want to say 550, 600, but I mean, that to me is a serious commitment from you. You've got, I mean, the people want to have it outside of Europe. I'm going to go, okay, tell me there's going to be 600 people in the United States and make me believe it, and then I'll go through all that effort. But I'm not prepared yet to, because I've seen, you know, shoot, I think I was telling the story of the Grand Tournament about when they did the Chaos Cup Resurrection, and there was still, you know, it was a great crowd, 100 or so coaches, and there were still several from overseas, and the biggest contingent were the three Spanish guys, all of whom are still dear friends of mine, Jordi, Pedro, Javier. And they ended up 1, 2, 3, and they just swept all the places, and yours truly was number 4, and I was pissed. I was like, "Oh, come on, guys!" It's like, what, you had to come this year. Like,
yeah, they came over with one mission, and they accomplished their mission.
They did, but I mean, it was marvelous. Blood Bowl. Jordy and I still talk fondly about. Oh yeah, remember that interception that I remember. Yeah, don't remind me, because we played, I think, in the next to last game. But it is fascinating. I am so glad that there is an interest. Ramsey is ever since he came down those 2 years has been a big believer. But I told him I got ill after the first World Cup, and it kind of is what led to me not taking a bigger role in keeping the TKC going and that kind of stuff. And I'm glad to see that. I always think that if you've organized things well, then it's just like with the old proverb of you're putting your hand into a bucket of water and removing it, then, you know, nobody notices. If you've done your job right, then you can walk away, and it only gets better. And people may not remember or care, and that was the least of the reasons I got involved. I just wanted to, because I think I was at that point a little bit I say I had been a treasurer of a big nonprofit organization before. I was used to the kinds of things, and here was this bunch of hair on fire gamers that wanted to do this thing about this little board game, and I just happened at that moment to share their passion about it. So I said, okay. I said, but I'm not gonna, but you're not gonna do any stupid shit. It's not gonna happen.
For
So
those people listening and those people who are going to listen, because this is recorded, there are plans to bring that tournament back, the Three Kingdoms Challenge, for 2019, but we're also looking to do a smaller tournament, and we kind of talked about it at the end of Ryan's tournament. And we're kind of laying down some groundwork for running a tournament, maybe in around November.
yeah, I think we picked a date in November.
Yeah, and this will be kind of like a road to the Three Kingdoms Challenge tournament. So look for that. Florida is still chock full of events. We have Loser Bowl coming up this weekend in Winter Haven. Liam was talking about adding an event which would be a precursor to the Crucible
Yes,
Blood Bowl weekends.
Carnage, I believe is what it was called.
Yeah, there's nothing official yet, but he talked about adding that, and that would be sometime in June, July.
July, I thought it was July.
Yeah, yep, July. And then we have all the tournaments that have been kind of reserved from now until the end of the year. So then there are traveling tournaments. There's one in Tennessee. There's the ACCC, the Atlantic Coast Charity Cup in Virginia, and there's Chaos Cup in September. So there is Blood Bowl. There's more Blood Bowl than I think anyone could possibly know what to do with over the course of the year. But one of the things I want to talk about, and I think I already know how Jim would feel about it, is so we're doing the structure or the open tournament series for the NAF, the Voodoo tournament series, and people are collecting their Voodoo points up until the end of the year. So once the year is over, and we have the people who are going to be winning in whatever category, and we talked about having state MVPs. Only because the other states that are in our tournament series are nowhere near the level that Florida's at the moment with the quantity of tournaments, but we wanted to include them in the award ceremony, we want to do an award ceremony. So I threw out a poll today, just looking for people's opinions, and I think this would be a good topic to kind of close out the AMA for tonight, for this month. I think we should do some, and it seemed like people were kind of keen on both. I think we should do something formal where it's like a dinner, because a lot of people, and Jim obviously feels this way, is that the meet and greet and the breaking of bread and the having the stories and stuff is important. And I think that'd be a cool thing to do, even if it was on its own, having an awards ceremony that way, where we hand out the awards to the winners of whatever category it is. The alternative to that is doing a small awards ceremony after an event, and the people who kind of voted that way were using the logic that you're probably going to have the most amount of people already at a tournament. You're already going to have them there, as opposed to setting a specific date for just an award ceremony. So, thoughts on that?
I tend to. I voted for the event. I was definitely about an event. I see the logic in the have a tournament then go. The only thing, we had to be pretty keen on the location. I'm still a big fan then of like kind of probably the Orlando-ish area, because that's the shortest distance from everyone. Because that would be the whole thing. If we have a tournament, what we could do is have a shorter tournament during the day, like a sevens or a street brawl, started early, but only do 3 rounds so that it ends a little early, and then we could get to some place and eat and hang out, so people could leave at a relatively reasonable hour. Would be a thought.
I think it's a good thought.
Yeah, I think it's a great. So any time we get together and laugh and reminisce, and if we get a chance to drink and have food, even better. For me, like I had said earlier, the thought of having TKC was to make the experience as robust and as comprehensive for the American players as I have experienced in Europe and other places. So for me, the whole idea would be to if we were going to do something like that, we might, because I think we've talked about the location for the TKC, and I know we had discussed Tampa as potentially hosting it, but a return to Orlando is certainly not out of the equation. If we had 2 nights there, if we had the overnight in Orlando, then having it in that night in between the 2 days, to me, makes a great deal of sense as well, and might be an added attraction for people to come and be part of it. Again, I think the November tournament, if we are kicking off a TKC, can be one, and we can mull over the idea about where to have it. But
Yeah.
I'm still going to be an advocate for the 2-day and whatever else we can build into that to make it more attractive and special. Like I say, there's a whole, I will bring out the whole series of trophies and stories about the various parts of the TKC, about the Gumpta Cup, like where the trophy name comes from. There's a whole backstory to that about the special little skink that has survived for X number of games and became legend. There's a whole series of things, and I think I told you I still have a number of the small alligator heads that we use for trophies as well. So I mean, there's a number of things that can happen. I think it's all up in the air. It's kind of like I try to, when it comes to this tournament, to respond to what people need, and we will in fact try to work out a special hotel and that kind of stuff like we have in the past. So the more the merrier, and I'm actually quite glad to be in Vegas again, because now I can tell Ramsey, it's like, okay, it's on the calendar, buddy. You better get your ass down here.
He will.
So, and I have a sneaking suspicion that there will be some other people that would enjoy, especially if we're doing it first of the year when the weather's not too hot and the vacation sites are still there. People can build a vacation around it. So.
Yeah, Ken Washington's threatened to come down a few times to some of these Florida tournaments. He hasn't made his way down here yet, but that might be the motivation he needs.
I'll tease him. I always tease him about the idea that ever since he's had that beautiful baby of his, he's quite content to come home from being a Navy submarine commander and stay there.
Yep. Well, I can't blame him for that. It gets harder.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing.
Like Mike Davies did, getting his kids and playing Blood Bowl and going to tournaments with them. That's what you got to do.
It sounds like cheating.
Yeah.
He's cheating his way through life then, because it works out pretty well for him. His kids are blood ballers. They're players.
Yep. I teased him that it's like the reason he became president is that he got all his children and family to vote for him. So.
Whatever. That's a good edge.
He had like an extra 10 votes. So,
so we actually had a silent participant here for like the last hour. Jason, we finally get a chance to acknowledge him. He hopped on the chat and he's been listening. So let's just anything you want to add, Jason?
I'm a fan of the event of getting people together. I would love to have some type of tournament where, even if it's just a small tournament, everyone goes out afterwards, has a few beers. I wouldn't mind a tournament where you're drinking beers during it.
I think that's going to be the way to go.
So you're just pro beer, is what you're saying.
I'm pretty pro beer there, yeah. I mean, I definitely could have used them when Josh's Goblins were messing me up in that first round of the tournament.
Well, I think beer and Blood Bowl and food and camaraderie could all be arranged for an event in January. So this way we can have some fun, give out some awards. Speaking of which, I mean, not to change gears or anything, but I did want to talk about Diff Duffman, because that has gone viral. And for those who don't know what it is, I'll let Ryan explain, but it has gone viral.
Diff Duffman Award. That was the award that I created for my tournament. One of my friends, he unfortunately 2 weeks before the tournament, and he was supposed to come, he passed away. Diff Duffman was always an orc quarterback that he used. We thought the name was hilarious. So I made the Golden Orc Thrower Diff Duffman Award for excellence. It was just for a person that I thought was a excellent person in the community of Blood Bowl, not necessarily the best player, but just a person who, shows good qualities. And I put my story out there as part of it was recommended as part of kind of the grieving process to kind of put the story out there. But apparently it touched a lot of Blood Bowlers. I'm still getting likes on it. I still get feeds. My feed will come up like, hey, this person liked it. So, and apparently it touched a lot of people, and people were asking me like, hey, can I create a Diff Duffman Award and give it out? And I'm like, sure. Like that's amazing if you wanted to do that. And I think the first ones to do it were, I think it was Jay Pina. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. I think out of San Antonio was the first one to give one away. And I've had other people contact me too. So to anyone who's listening that did do that, you don't know how much that means to me. And I really appreciate it. But yeah, that was from one of my friends. And yeah, it just kind of went to a place that I never thought it would go.
Yeah, I'll be scrolling through the Blood Bowl community feed, and all of a sudden I'm like, there's Diff Duffman. I'm like, that is like the coolest thing. Actually got one question for tonight from Mark Perry out in Vegas, and he's been listening to our AMA since we started. He wanted to ask Jim if he was the one who made the human team for the first World Cup. And also apparently you gave Mark one at a Moracle Cup, and he says, ask him if there was ever an ogre made for the team.
Let's see. Hi, Mark. It's good to hear from you. Glad to see you're listening in. And the answer to that is that because shipping metal was going to be expensive no matter how we did it, is that we had the designs made up in Spain, and yes, a human team was selected. So that is, at that time, that human team was considered to be fairly risque. Some people like it, some people don't. I will love it always simply because it was the first World Cup team that was put into production. I believe, if I remember the how-tos of that team, Tom Anders used one of his earlier casting companies. I don't think that he uses them anymore. In fact, I'm sure he doesn't. To cast that one. And I remember having that 70 or so pounds of metal in my suitcase and bringing it over from the United States over to Nottingham, and then sitting in a hotel room with Gav Sutton, who is Dwarf Coach. No, not Dwarf Coach. What is Gav's? Oh, he's got that silly elf thing. Anyway, him and Woody and I were all sitting there putting together all the arms. I mean, it's a complicated set, and so we were driving out of these different bags and putting together hundreds of sets of that human team. But yes, you can blame and direct, although I won't listen. I mean, it's now 15 years ago, so I'm just not going to hear a whole lot of complaint about it. But yes, you can direct all of the positive and negatives to me.
Very cool. Anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap up this third AMA? Wow, man, that 2 hours went by fast.
Yes, it did.
I mean, there's so much more we could sit here and talk about, but
I know. I'd like to thank all of our fans. They're very awesome.
Well, I will not want to be a guest all the time or even a lot of the time, but I will be happy to come back and tell some more stories if you'd like.
Definitely.
We always love war stories.
Yeah, the Old Man Monkey story hour. We can definitely do that.
The irregular hour.
Well, we'll set another one for next month and continue to do what we do, regardless of who listens. Because if you're not listening to it live now and asking some questions, I know a lot of people have gone back and listened to them. Once they run out of the podcast to listen to, they're like, "Oh, what's this? Oh, I'll give it a listen."
And I guess, but if they have a question, they can also email, because you have an email, don't you? Like Blood Bowl blog. Don't you have that, Jim?
Yeah, bloodbowlblog@gmail.com.
So why don't y'all email that if you have a question for the show that we can answer?
Sure. Or drop it on the event page. We'll see it.
Or drop it on the event page, or you can ask it live.
Yeah, last month, I thought I was doing a good job of watching, and then Jason, thankfully, was monitoring and answering questions in the chat. But there were like 5 people in there who were just like throughout the course of the 2 hours or whatever, they were asking questions, and I just did not do a good job. So I'm sorry if you were trying to get my attention or asking something, but Jason was there to pick up the slack. So thank you for that.
Pure professionalism.
I know. Hey, admitting when I'm wrong is professionalism. I'm married. I've learned that. I've been mastering that trait for 20 years.
Well, thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. It was fun to talk about it.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks for coming on and sharing all the Blood Bowl history and your thoughts and opinions. It's much appreciated.
Hey, no problem. You guys have a good one, and I'll see you soon. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Jim, have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.